Hello and welcome. Morning, afternoon, and good evening. We're excited to welcome you to another session in our monthly webinar series. Today's session will focus on leadership narratives, shaping clear and aligned cultures with values. I'm Nellie Stansbury, Denison Consulting's Director of Digital Marketing. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to encourage you all to use the chat and Q&A features below. Please test out their functionality by sharing where in the world you're joining us from. Our team will watch your comments and questions and will pose to our speakers at the end of their discussion during Q&A. I'd like to now quickly introduce today's speakers before turning things over to them to get started. I'm joined by guest speaker Scott McInnes, a Denison partner and founder of Inspiring Change, Karen Jones, Director of Consulting and Partnerships of Denison Consulting Europe, and Margaret Gorman, VP of Sales and Marketing, who will be helping me answer questions throughout the session. With that, I'll turn things over to Karen and Scott to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Nellie. Scott, you going to do the slides? Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to put the slides on, Karen.
Yes, that would be great.
Let me do that. Here we go.
Marvelous. That's lovely.
That.
Yeah.
Thanks. On you go.
Great. Scott and I just really want to say, if you hear anything in this webinar that you'd like to talk and discuss more with us, then you have our emails here. Please make use of them. We'd be absolutely thrilled to get into further discussion and debate with you, because we just have 20 minutes today and there's lots more to talk about. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Karen.
So this session is going to explore our insights from working with our clients as they were exploring their culture and the impact of core values in their journey. Scott and I have worked together over the last 18 months, I think now, and it's been absolutely wonderful to share and learn from Scott's experience in communications and corporate narratives. He does amazing things, turning strategy into an inspiring story, and we have been working with clients together to really bring their strategic story to life. We'll pay particular attention to the significance of leaders, the importance of co-creating for the collective ownership, and effort required to actually embed the values, bringing them to life, and enabling a powerful accountability to ensure that they feel real, lived on a daily basis, even when that's really tough to do. We're going to leave time at the end of this discussion, we promise. And as we said before, we'd love to have more conversation and debate with any one of you. Thanks, Scott. So, our definition of high-performance culture is really systemic and structured. As you can see, core values is only one of 12 indices for us that make up a defined high-performance culture. We know from our research that successful companies seek balance. They are external and stable. By knowing their purpose with strategic priorities and clear goals and objectives along the way. They also realise that they have to bring people with them to gain ownership and involve people early. So they need to also be internally focused and flexible, making sure that their people feel empowered to deliver in great teams and with the appropriate skills required. Flexibility is also required externally to consistently understand the customer and adjust decisions, to change as required, and then to learn from both the successes and the failures. They are consistently adapting to the changing contexts, both in order to deliver the promises they make in the market, and they also need to coordinate with each other, managing conflict and the difference for the best decision possible. And they absolutely, and here's where the core values come in, they absolutely need to know what they stand for, what their guiding principles are, and what they're prepared not to tolerate. So we know from our research that these two items that you can see here, they're 2 out of 4 of the items that we use on our core values index, are significant drivers for a broader cultural organizational culture. This suggests that having a well-defined set of values and leaders who exemplify those values is absolutely crucial in shaping the overall culture of your organization. Thanks, Scott. So what do core values do then? They set the expectation of what it's like to work in an organization. When we ask clients to say to us, what do you mean by our high performance culture? Core values is probably the first thing that gets mentioned. They enable organizations to attract like-minded people with aligned personal values. They set the standard. They make sure that everybody is clear about what's expected of them and what they can expect from other people. And my favorite definition of a high performance culture is, it is reflected by the behaviors that we are prepared to tolerate. And that's a really significant statement for us. So we know that core values contribute significantly to a high performance culture. Thanks, Scott. So Denison's research and development team have completed some recent research, and they found that the same two core value items as before, so is there a clear and consistent set of values that govern the way we do business, and do leaders and managers practice what they preach, also play a significant role in building trust and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within any organization. This overlap suggests that focusing on these core values can simultaneously improve trust levels among employees and advance your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Core values were also found to influence safety within an organization. They impacted the commitment of leaders to safety, the continuous improvement of safety protocols and practices, and indeed the reporting and resolving of safety issues quickly. This indicates that a strong adherence to core values can enhance safety culture and practices within any organization. We also discovered that core values are closely related to team orientation, empowerment, and the agreement items. So team orientation and empowerment sit within the involvement for us. Agreement sits within the yellow consistency trait. This suggests that a synergy between core values and these cultural dimensions. In other words, organizations that prioritize core values tend to also emphasize teamwork, empowerment of their employees, and agreement amongst team members. This synergy is consistent across organizations of varying cultural strengths. So core values then play a central role in shaping various aspects of organizational culture, including trust, diversity, equity, and inclusion, safety, and their interrelationships with the other cultural dimensions. Focusing on and reinforcing core values can have a positive cascading effect on multiple facets of an organization's culture. So what is, a values-based culture then? This is a culture shaped by a clear and defined set of guiding principles, which will enable and define the decisions that you take, creating a strong sense of community. It also connects back to your purpose. They help ensure that behavior is aligned in order to achieve the long-term vision. They're the roadmaps, as it were, to define how we do things around here. And now I'm going to let Scott share with you the steps to begin to make this a reality and to get it to happen in any organization. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Karen. So what Karen outlined there was the why, and I guess what I want to do for the rest of the session is maybe talk a little bit about the how. So let's get really practical around how you create a culture which is aligned around values. We see there being 5 very clear steps. I'm going to go through each one in a bit of detail. There is a lot in here. There's a recording going out afterwards, I believe, from Nelly and the team, so you'll be able to watch this back. From the very top then, of course, to have a set of an organization aligned around values, you have to have values. So defining them first is key. Making sure that we have leaders bought in and committed to actually living those is the critical second step. In terms of getting them out there and helping the organization to understand what they mean, champions can be very, very helpful in that regard, but only if those champion networks are really well run. Of course, values need to be embedded in processes and systems around your organization, or else those processes and systems can often get in the way of organization or people in the organization being able to bring those to life. And of course, the final step, step 5, clear, compelling communications that bring those values to life are absolutely fundamental to making sure that as you're going on a values-based journey, people understand what they are and, more importantly, what they mean when they are and they aren't lived. Let's look at each of those steps one at a time. So defining values. So what's key is actually having a set of values, a set of those principles that guide the organization, how you do what you do. And what we've seen from the work that we do in the whole space of values is organizations that often will go off, the senior team goes to a country club or a hotel offsite for a day, and they come back and say, we've decided on these values, and here they are, people, please go out and put them into play. That doesn't work. What works is involving employees in that process of definition, because that helps the people in your organization to feel as though they've had share in defining what they are, and therefore a sense of ownership of those when they're put out into the business. Making sure that senior leaders are bought in and are aligned is critical, because there's no point having half your team going out with one view of what a value means and somebody else going out with a different view and another couple of people going out with a different view. There has to be consistency across that senior team. As one of our clients often says, leaders cast long shadows. And so having that consistency is critical. We need to make sure that they're relevant, compelling, and memorable. Words splattered across a wall like innovation, ideas, empathy, emotion, respect, trust, all those BS words that we see thrown out there all the time when it comes to values, they're just not going to cut it. So how do we actually create something that's a little bit more memorable? And of course, values are nothing without behaviors. As we once heard somebody say, I know what your values might be, but I can see your behaviors. So behaviors under each value will help your people to really see what great looks like when it comes to living those values. Just to give you a quick bit of background, I mean, we see that there's a structure of a value. So the concept that you might come up with in this example, and this is one that we made up that could perhaps come from a healthcare organization, perhaps the value concept is care, being caring. The value expression, which is what you would effectively have up on the wall or in a staff handbook, might be lead with empathy. We need to give it a little bit more grit and give people a little bit more in terms of understanding what that value means. So we give it a descriptor, which in this case might be we support each other and create an environment where we can all develop, grow, and thrive. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, those all important behaviors, which in this case might be we listen to others, we give feedback constructively and support each other's development, and we always find win-win solutions. And when you think about embedding the values into processes and systems, particularly into performance management, then it's those behaviors that are absolutely critical, because they're the things that you're going to measure people's performance on. So getting those right is absolutely key. We talked about alignment. And of course, alignment then comes with leader buy-in. Making sure that the buy-in and the commitment of senior leaders is there, because people, it doesn't matter how flat your organizational structure is, people still tend to look up the ladder. They look to see what the people above them are doing. So if leaders across the organization, we've said senior leaders here, actually all leaders aren't living your values, then why should anybody else live your values? It's not a case of, monkey see, monkey do. We need to make sure, though, that we provide training and coaching to support leaders in role modeling those values. If we just assume that they're going to go out and do it, the likelihood is we're going to get a rude awakening, because they just aren't necessarily going to do that. We can use senior leaders then to cascade down into the wider management group and support those leaders in bringing the values to life down to all of the teams through your organization. And really critically, and this is where the rubber does tend to really hit the road, is asking leaders to use those values as lenses through which to challenge their thinking and their decision-making. I'm about to make a decision and I think, okay, well, if our values are, we treat each other with respect, we're open and honest, and we're innovative, the decision that I'm about to make, if I look through through those three lenses, is that the right decision? And the brave organization is the one that says, actually, no, it's not the right decision. It's not the right decision at all. And I have to go back to the drawing board. That's hard. But that is when using values as a lens through which to make decisions really, really comes to the fore. Of course, leader alignment is really critical. And Karen, do you want to take us through some of your thinking here from this live data?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. This was an example from a client. It was a large global business. They employed about 12,000 employees in total. And the CEO wanted to start to assess his top 4 layers of leadership, roughly about kind of 300-400 people. And he wanted to discover, really to think about, what were they believing and assuming to be true, given what they were perceiving around the 12 behaviors that we measure on the Denison Cultural Diagnostic. To his credit, and that of the executive committee, there in the N0, the level 0, they accepted and heard the need to listen more to their direct reports and the levels 2 and 3 beneath them. As you can see, it was only the 10 executive leaders who actually appeared clear and aligned on their values, and they believed that they were modeling those to everybody else. And clearly they got a very strong feedback from their direct reports to say that they weren't experiencing the same clarity on what the set of values were, and they really weren't saying that all leaders and managers are practicing what they preach. There was certainly, even from the executive committee, they were acknowledging that they may have felt they had the values, but they still understood that they weren't being held to account, and that it wasn't really connecting back to their ethical code. So they did invest in bringing their top 100 leaders together to discuss their culture results in its entirety. And now Scott and I are now working with this executive leadership team, and they are reviewing and refining and going through this process on their core values. So it was a hard wake-up call. And they heard and they listened, and they're now doing something very different to change this. Thanks, Scott.
Super, thanks, Karen. So getting that alignment piece right is absolutely critical. When it comes to rolling out the values through the organization, champion networks can be brilliant. They can support the embedding of values out across the organization. Those champions needn't necessarily be leaders. Not all leaders have epaulets or stripes. They could be formal or informal leaders through the organization. But what's really important is making sure that any champion network has a very clear understanding of what their role is, and that perhaps even they're objectified in that role so that their boss gives them the time to do this job really well. I'm sure that everybody on the call has been involved in or has worked in organizations where champion networks are kicked off and then they just kind of fizzle out because they don't really have any strength behind them. Embedding, as I've talked about already earlier on, when it comes to performance management, is key. Making sure that values are embedded in systems and processes from cradle to grave in the employee life cycle. Think about how you use your values in job ads and job specs and interview questions and structure, so that we're hiring people for values add. I'm not very keen on the term values fit. I like the term values add. I want people to come and, based on our values and being aligned with them, bring more to the organization that perhaps was there before. Helping people to understand them during onboarding, bringing them to life through stories. And we'll talk about communications in a second. Values make performance management not just about the what. Have you done 110% of your number this year? But the how. Have you done 110% of your number this year aligned with our values? Or have you left a trail of destruction behind you, which is not what we want in our organization? And of course, recognition can really, really help to reward those who do indeed live your values. I wanted to share a quick example of a client that we worked here in Ireland, who'd been through, as you can see from the docs results from a 2022 survey that we did with them, had been through a pretty torrid time. They'd come through a very, very tough patch, and I think that's pretty apparent in the scores that they got when we ran docs with them back in 2022. We've picked 4 areas of change with them 4 areas that they were planning to focus on. We worked with the senior team to prioritize those areas and put in place action planning and action plans to bring on those 4 selected areas of priority. What happened a year later was this. Those 4 areas were creating change, which grew by 40 percentile points, team orientation that grew by 32, coordinate integration that grew by 40, and core values that grew by 10. Now, you might think 10, wow, that's not great compared to the growth in the other areas. Actually, what's very interesting is that the values actually only launched 2 or 3 weeks before we did the second round of docs. So from our perspective, had we have seen a huge leap in that score, we'd have been asking questions like, is that really true? Are those really, are people really saying that from a place of truth and honesty, or are they just saying it because that's what we want to hear? I think next time round in the 2024 docs, we'd expect to see that number significantly higher, because this organization has been out doing roadshows, explaining values, telling stories, embedding them into systems and processes. So we'll see in 12 months' time, hopefully, there'll be a big jump there. But actually, what's really nice to see is that it's not changed overnight, and it isn't changing overnight. It just takes time to do that embedding. To finish up, because a lot of the embedding, whilst it's about processes and systems and getting them out there, is also about communication. So this whole idea of linking and labeling values, actually saying to people, that piece of work that Karen did, well, that really helps to exemplify our working better together value, bringing stories to life that help people to go, oh yeah, I kind of get that. I understand it. We don't want just organization-wide comms. We want local leader comms as well. People, those leaders that we spoke about earlier on, who are aligned to the values, who understand them, who are getting them out there to be able to discuss values with their teams, to have those same conversations on a local level. And in doing so, really raise awareness and create understanding of what great looks like when it comes to living the values, because it helps them to see what they look like in practice. Values in theory are values on a wall. Values in practice is what we really, really want to see. And of course, all of this communication helps people to understand the importance of them, and also start to think about and continue to think about what they can do to live them, excuse me, on an ongoing basis. Now, this is not a once and done. Yes, you probably will define your core values once every few years, but then there's a whole series of constantly reviewing, testing, and learning when it comes to buy-in and support of leaders, when it comes to the champion networks, when it comes to embedding those values and linking and labeling through clear communications. Organizations should be going back and reviewing all the time to make sure that what has been planned is getting done and is having the impact that we want it to have. With that, at 23 minutes, we've got 7 minutes left, I think, for questions. So I see 3 questions there. I am going to stop sharing so we can be back on screen. Thanks, Nelly.
Yeah, we do have a good number of questions. Anyone else want to ask anything? We have some time here as well. Feel free to shoot them over to me. One question we got early on, what if not all leaders have bought in to newly defined values? Should we go ahead with rolling them out, or should we invest time on achieving buy-in and consensus?
Karen, you go first or I go first?
You can go. I'll come in.
Thanks. What that's called is throwing a colleague under a bus, Karen.
I'm happy to go. I've got a strong opinion. I mean, my opinion would be if there's a misalignment at the senior leadership team level, you need to resolve it there, because if you've got leaders who aren't aligned to the values, they're not quite the right values. Because there's a wonderful paper by Lencioni, and he's really clear that although we need to involve and we need to get people with a sense of ownership of refining the values, the leadership have to be crystal clear on what core values and guiding principles are for the business. So I would stop at the disconnect with the leaders. I certainly wouldn't pursue it. That would be my strong opinion, Scott. So
yeah, and I agree. And I think, just to build on what you said there about, if there's not alignment among the senior team, maybe, or among the senior leaders, maybe they're the wrong values, maybe they are, or maybe they're the wrong leaders.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I will share the Lencioni paper with Nelly. Can we get that reference?
If you share, we can share out with everyone.
Yeah. That's the much more interesting. Why is there a disconnect at the leadership team level? That would be the much more interesting thing to solve. Definitely.
Thank you both. A few other questions. The two of you, have you ever seen a good minimum or maximum number for company core values?
So for me, this is a really simple one.
Yeah,
it's not many. It's 3.
I would absolutely say the same.
I remember going into a client boardroom once, and they were very quick to show me their values, which, as we dug down a little further, had literally come from a leader offsite and then gone on the wall. And they said, we have these 7 values. And I said, oh my God, 7 values. And then I read them, and it was openness and honesty, trustworthiness and something else, this and that. And I was like, oh my God, that's 14 values. People can't remember that many things. 3 values, that's what you should be shooting for. Maybe 4, but shoot for 3.
Yeah. I'm with you, Scott. That's why I like working with him. We agree.
Have you ever found that building commitment to shared core values has the unintended side effect that evolution of individuals' own values gets lost? Compliance culture versus freedom to evolve.
For me, it has to, any rollout of values has to have balance between what the organization needs and what the individuals need. And if you think about, obviously, risk culture, compliance culture are getting really strong in some organizations, but that's got to be balanced with the wider organizational need and also the values that your organization has. We know that those people who are now coming into the workforce, 18 and 20 and 25 years old, want to have and work in organizations where the alignment is there between organizational values and their own personal values. So I think it's just, for me, it's about sensible balance in organizations.
And I make the connection back to purpose and vision. I think for me, it's a kind of, if you have strong personal values, you're probably working in a company where you can also connect to the purpose and the vision, and how you can bring those personal values to that purpose.
Yeah, not exactly a follow-up question, but sort of a similar vein here. Can you explain how competencies relate to values?
So for me, competencies, sorry, do you want to go, Karen?
No, you go. I'll go after you.
So for me, competencies are effectively behaviors. They're describing the how of the value. So for me, they're one and the same thing. They're the technical things that we expect people to be able to exhibit. Anything to add, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I think competencies for me feel more like are somebody able to do something? The attitude for which they do that for me is the values and the mindset. So they might be able to do it, but they might do it with a certain attitude that actually isn't ideal. So I would separate skill with mindset and personal values.
Thank you both. Well, maybe just time for one more question before we wrap up here. And thank you to everyone who wrote in. And we'll try and reach out to you, our team, if we didn't get a chance to answer live. Let's see, we've got some good ones here. Could either of you comment on storytelling as a method of codifying values behaviorally?
I'm going to
because we've only got 1 minute left. I could talk about this for a week. Storytelling separately. What storytelling is the best way to codify values? Simply saying to somebody, together we're better, or simply saying to somebody, we trust each other as values is fine. But actually, it's the stories of what happens when those values are, and actually really powerfully, if you've got an organization that's brave enough to do it when they're not lived. So what happens in an organization or in a relationship when an organization isn't lived? What's the impact on the people? And what was the outcome when that was perhaps called out and changed? And I think that for me, storytelling is at the absolute core of bringing values to life. As I said before, simply having words on a wall, having them written in a handbook, yes, you need those things, but you need to bring them to life. That's how we get people here. And when Karen talks about purpose, for me, purpose is about heart, and values should be about heart as well.
And I think just to add to that, that's the line, that's the item that's usually the lowest. You know, do we hold each other accountable? So even in organizations that are really clear about their core values, holding each other to account is the big challenge. Can I really say, actually, I'm not experiencing you behaving the way we said we would? So that's the real big challenge. And having stories that are demonstrating when that is and isn't happening is really powerful and opens up that conversation, I think.
And whoever it was just sent that heart, thank you very much. That's exactly how Karen and I feel about it as well.
Yes.
Well, we're at the end of our time here, but I want to thank both of you for your time and thank our audience for participating and sending in questions. We'll do our best to reach out and answer them if we didn't get to them during the live session. But huge thank you to Scott and Karen, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Great.
Thank you very much. You take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.